Hello, and welcome to Outnumbered the podcast. I'm Audrey.
And I'm Bonnie. We are experienced moms to a combined total of 19 children.
In our weekly episodes, we explore relatable topics using our perspectives of humor and chaos.
Tune in for advice and encouragement to gain more joy in your parenting journey.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. And we have another episode for you today. This one is about a topic that we've been thinking about for a while, and it's on the subject of agency. So we're going to talk about what that is and what that means and how to use it as a parent, how to teach it to your kids. But we'll get all into more of that in just a minute because Bonnie wants to start us off with something so sweet.
Yeah, so cute. So, sometimes kids say funny things all the time, but I had a really cute experience with my daughter the other day. And luckily I was sitting by a pen and paper and had the wherewithal to write it down as she was saying it because it was long. But every time I read it back, it just makes me giggle. So my now 5-year-old, she was 4 when she wrote this, started scribbling some gibberish on a Post-it note here in my office. And then she handed it to me and said, "Can you give it to God?" And I said, "You want me to give this to God?" "Yeah, when he comes." "Oh, okay. Well, what does it say?" So she takes the Post-it back from me and reads the following. "I love God, heart, with the true indeed, and the with becomes to the name of God. I like God. He is the heart of love. His wife died in a war, and then God's wife comes back to life." The end. It's like she's listening to the Bible reading and just coming up with her own stuff, And she's kind of trying to use the right wording. And anyway, it just made me giggle to no end. I just thought that was beautiful. Yes, I will give that to God. Thank you so much.
It's so sweet when we see our kids start to develop their own little relationship in their own way. And I love to hear them use big Bible words that they like. They have no clue what they mean, but they use them anyway.
With the true indeed.
True indeed. I'm going to start throwing that randomly into my conversations.
Please do. And now with the true indeed, Audrey will continue with this podcast.
Yes, thank you. What is agency? So we're going to talk about that. So there may be other definitions out there. There are probably other definitions out there, but what we're thinking about, we pulled some together in exactly what we think of agency. And this is like the thing that acts to produce a particular result, or the person or thing through which power is exerted, or the condition, the state of acting or exerting power. So it's just a nice way to say a good hard kick in the seat of the pants. I mean, really.
Yeah. I also like to think of it as like the power to choose, right? These definitions say acting, producing, exerting power, right? Using this agency is using the power you have over your own life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like making the decision, executing upon the decision that you've made.
Yeah. The follow through, right? A great example of this word is in sports, right? Sometimes sports players can be free agents when they don't have an agent working for them. They're just kind of like out on their own. They get to decide where to go, where to finish their career. I think that's what that means. So that's just an example of being out there and being able to use your own power of follow through, of choice. We have a great companion episode to this topic, and it is called Intentional Parenting, and it's episode number 12. And as we get into it, you'll understand how these two come together, because as we make choices as intentional parents, then we have to have the follow through to actually execute those decisions, which are sometimes hard and sometimes we get a lot of kickback for.
Okay, so we're kind of going to talk about 4 main aspects of giving yourself agency. So, like how we get to that actual execution part. So, in intentional parenting, we talked a lot about the research, about being intentional, why you're doing what you're doing. But this one is maybe more of the how you get to where you actually take that first step forward and execute upon those wonderful decisions that you've intentionally made. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about how we help our kids have agency, because that's pretty, like, we give them a head start in life if we can teach them how to have agency.
Yes, for sure. And both of these are very, very difficult things to do sometimes, right? To make these hard decisions and follow through them, including allowing our children to do that. So it's going to be a good chat. So the first one we want to talk about is a forgiveness specifically to ourselves for a past lack of agency or even a misuse of agency, if you want to think about it like that. The first thing to remember is we kind of are stuck with the past we have. There's literally no way to go back and change it. So that gives you a really good head start on what we are going to tell you to think about that past. There's not much we can do about it, so we can't stress about it, right? To stop wasting so much time and bandwidth and energy about, oh, if only I had X, oh, if only I had Y. It doesn't make any sense. Instead, to project all that energy that we want to spend worrying about the past onto the future or even our present, the only thing that we can control.
Right, exactly. Because we do have, especially as moms, we're very aware that we have a finite amount of energy that we can use. And if we're wasting it on worry about the past that we can't change, oh, that's just a waste. We've got so much that we have to, that demands our time and energy. We've really got to be careful how we spend it. So, something that really helps me in thinking about this is a phrase that I heard a while back, and it just really resonated with me. So, I probably used it on the podcast before, but it is that everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen because that's how it did happen. And so that is just like such a huge peace thing for me. Like I just trust, okay, all right, the past, I just trust that that is the way it was supposed to be. And I'm going to work, put my energy, put my focus on the present and the future because those are not determined yet.
Yeah. And actually, as we get into the talking about the kids and agency, I would even argue that we need to narrow our focus even more just to the present. Because if we, with our own agency, we like to focus on the past and stress out about what we screwed up back then. With our kids, we like to focus on the future and what they might screw up in the future, when really all we really can affect right now is the present. And in this area, I like to think sometimes about how animals live their lives. This is kind of a silly comparison because most of the time we don't want to be like animals. But how often does your cat or your cow, Audrey, sit around and wish that they had done something different yesterday? They just don't. They just
Never.
focus on what's at hand, which is, where's my next meal going to come from? And is this fly bugging me that I need to, like they're very present minded. And maybe that's a lesson we can learn from something as simple minded as like a cat or a dog, is to focus on what we are doing right this second. I personally have never really struggled with regret because I think I've learned that kind of mindset early on that, well, it is what it is. So I might as well look forward. I tend to, if anything, I looked a little too forward rather than focusing on the present. However, if you struggle with this, I would offer this alternative thought. Your future self will be looking back on today's choices as her past, right? So she probably won't even be thinking about yesterday's, but there's only so much of the past we even focus on. So think about it that way. If you want to focus on the past, focus on the past, or focus on the today that will be your past in the future, if that makes any sense at all. So just
Uh,
release that negative energy. Just give yourself permission to move on. Nothing other than learning the lesson from what we did wrong, quote unquote, because it may or may not have been wrong. It may have just been something that we didn't like, right? Then we can just put all that energy into the future.
yes, that makes total sense. I really am glad that you shared that. Like your future self is going to look back on today and it's the past. So you can affect the past in that way by affecting today,
But don't
what you do
but
today.
don't think about that too long, because then you start getting confused. You're like this in little time loop in your mind. I didn't get into quantum physics for a reason. It's very confusing.
Speaking of quantum physics, haha, the next part we want to talk about is the timing of agency. So I've discovered that everything ebbs and flows. We actually even have an episode about that, the ebb and flow. So sometimes things, it's just like everything we try to do, every execution we try to make, it's like we're bumping up against a brick wall and that is not working. Okay, so just trust that. And also trust that when the time is right, it'll be just super smooth. Everything is going to fall into place and it's going to work out right. It's going to work out smoothly the best way that it could. So like when you're bumping up against those walls, be aware of that. And when it's going smoothly, just keep in mind, yeah, this is timing.
Yes, and this timing thing is another thing. Like you said, we just butt heads with them sometimes. No, 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 I'm not ready for that. How many of us felt 100% ready before we started having kids? Like, no, I
Mm,
don't know
yeah.
anybody like that. Very often we will feel that flow happening in our life, and we will notice when we are either putting up a stink, like delaying it a little bit, right? Pushing it off, or if we are pushing ahead. And this tends to be my temptation, to push ahead and shove and elbow my way through because I want to get to this result out in the future. But if you kind of just follow that flow of life, very often you will have the best outcome. And generally, what we're talking about is God's timing, right? Allowing things to happen in your life the way they're happening. Now, this doesn't mean just being a passive observer in your life. It's very easy to just sit back and do nothing and think, well, I'm just going with the flow. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about
No.
seizing, doing your best to live the life you're meant to live, and then seizing the opportunities that come to you when they come, right? When you push them off, or you seek other opportunities that seem to not be the right timing, sometimes the life that you're meant to have eludes you a little bit, if that makes sense. So I've seen this over and over in my life, and I challenge you to look for it in yours too. You'll see how the timing just kind of fits.
Yeah, yeah. So I have kind of just like a surface level example for this. Like I think both Bonnie and I are talking a lot deeper than this surface level example that I'm going to give, but just for an example. So the house that we live in now, the water was not great for drinking, and we'd done our research and we found that it would probably be better in our circumstance to drink water that had been purified. So we went to we kept gallon jugs, and we'd haul like 20 of them at a time down to a health food store that had a water purifier, and we'd fill them up and we'd bring them back home. And it was like this, this bi-weekly ordeal. We had to keep purified water because it was better for us and the kids to drink. And we wanted to buy a whole house purifier, or at least a spigot one that we could have in the kitchen. And we'd done all the research and we knew which kind we wanted, and we it was the right decision. We were already buying purified water, but like we just couldn't execute on that. We could not make the decision, and we actually not we'd made the decision, but we couldn't execute on the decision. And it wasn't a financial thing because we're already spending a bunch of money every week to buy the purified water. It was just something. It was like this execution we couldn't make. We couldn't click the button to buy the purifier. Well, then just a bunch of things fell into place, and just suddenly one day we bought it. And what was interesting about that was um, shortly after that, so we bought it, we installed it, we're all enjoying, oh, isn't this nice? We don't have to go down, haul all these crates that we've had to all these years and fill up all this water. And shortly after that happened, this source of water that we had been using was not available to us anymore. And so it was like, oh, well, okay, hello. Somehow everything just fell into place at exactly the right time when we needed it. And okay, so like I said, this is just like a really shallow surface level example, but it's just there was some point in there where we came to the ability to take agency on that decision that we had made, researched, had the right intention that we were going to do it, but it was a timing thing
Mm.
where it worked out.
Yeah, there are so many. I think all of us probably have so many examples like that. The one that comes to me is when we bought our current house. It was one of those experiences where I knew it was time. I knew it was time, and we looked and we looked and we looked for probably 6 months, and then my poor real estate agent was like, "I hate you people. What's wrong with you?" Every house she showed us, we're like, "Not quite, not quite." And I honestly can tell you how many times, can't tell you how many times I was tempted to go with a house that she was showing us that seemed to have most of what we wanted, but it just didn't feel right, right? And so we finally got to the point where we're like, all right, this search is over. We're just going to stop for a while. Obviously, it felt like we were pushing, right? And it just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah.
We told her that week, okay, we're going to stop looking. She said, one just came on the market this week. You know where this is going, right? Do you want to come see it on
Yeah.
Saturday? And we pulled up, and I'm like, this is the one. it was just like that. And I'm so
Yeah.
grateful that I didn't say yes to one of these other houses that was almost right, but not quite. So it's that decision making, especially with big decisions like a big expensive purifying system, or a house, or a education option for your child, or any number of these big decisions can be crippling, and you can be tempted to just sit around and do nothing. But once you've made the decision, go with that flow that you feel your life is pushing you towards, and it will all work out for sure. The third part of giving yourself agency is allowing yourself to have permission to make and execute these choices, right? Sometimes it's almost like we're waiting for permission. So the other day I was just kind of looking around my life, and I'm like, I'm I'm like a legitimate adult. I have this house and all these kids. I know that sounds silly, but you all feel the same way you did when you were
Yeah, I
18.
know.
I'm thinking, and I pay all
Yeah.
these bills and I like have a mortgage and all these big adult things. And wow, that's really weird. And yet I still sit around and wait for someone to tell me it's okay to do something, right? But if you don't give yourself permission to make a decision in your life, who are you waiting around to give you permission? Do you need to call your mom and ask her? Like, is it your husband's? Is it your neighbors? Is it your friends? And sometimes I'm kind of a paralysis by analysis person. Like, well, let me just ask one more person. Well, let me just think about this a little bit longer. You, girl, it's you. I mean, obviously, you're going to want to talk to your partner. If it's a big decision, you're not going to go buy a house without him. But it's your life. You get to decide.
Yes. You know what? This is really powerful when you turn around to discover that you're the adult here, right? And it can lead you to asking some really, really big, terrifying questions. Like, the sky's the limit once you give yourself permission, right? There is no decision you can't make because it's yours, it's there. So you might be asking yourself, if fear or money or fill in the blank, whatever is the thing that's keeping you from giving yourself permission and using your agency, is okay. So if that wasn't a factor, what would you do?
Oh, isn't that a fun
Whoa.
question?
Oh, it's so crazy. And it is kind of scary. Like, it's scary big because once you've given yourself permission to have agency, go for it. I mean, really, it's kind of mind boggling, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And so a few examples for this. What are we even talking about? It could be something as simple as buying the darn purifying system you've been sitting on forever, right? It could be something as scary as pulling your kids out of public school or putting them into public school. It could be something like taking that vacation that you never really wanted to spend the money on, but you really would like to take and make memories with your kids. For me, it has been things like starting a podcast with a woman I barely knew but had basically everything in common with, who lived on the other side of the country, or starting a
Oh,
business that everyone said that was a terrible idea because the market's so oversaturated. And you probably know, and if you don't know now, something will come up, or something has come up in the past, and you know exactly what we're talking about. Um, to just ask yourself that big scary question: what am I waiting for? Whose permission am I waiting for?
yes, I love to talk about that. And then it's too scary, and I have to go, like, sort M&Ms into the proper color or something for a little bit to calm myself down.
Go for a walk. Go breathe outside.
Okay, the last aspect that we want to talk about is freedom. All right, listen, we live in the freest world probably that's ever been. We live in an amazing time. Technology has enabled us so much freedom of time and resources, and like, physically, we're not, down at the stream washing our clothes. That's time, and that's physical energy, and that's effort. We can do almost literally anything that we set our mind to. Like, there isn't we have the freedom, especially in this beautiful country that we live in America. We have the freedom. And so focus on the freedom of making decisions and executing on those decisions, because you can. There is nothing holding you back in a country that is founded on freedom. Who's there is I don't even know what to say. It's like,
It it's
you're free.
terrifying
You're
how much
free.
freedom you have. Yeah, it is. And sometimes we hold ourselves back because we don't like to think about that. We don't like to think about just how much power we have over our own lives. We like to blame other things, right? I think a lot of us have examples of when we have been held back by some sort of fear, right? And we actually allow ourselves to stay in bondage, right? In some sort of non-free capacity because we're so afraid of the freedom, right? Um, Generally for women, it's something along the lines of, what is everybody else going to think, right? Um, I'm not smart enough to do this. I'm not skinny enough to do this. I'm not rich enough to do this. And what any number of things, all those deep dark insecurities start coming up when we start thinking about doing something that is scary. But the thing is, our choices are ours, and no one else is going to be answering for our choices. So what happens at the end of our life when we're sitting around thinking, gee, I really wish I would have done X, Y, or Z. I always talk about X, Y, or Z. I guess I like math or something. Um, we're the only one accountable for that decision. We can't sit around and tell our great grandkids, well, my neighbor really kind of judged me when I talked about starting that business. So I chose not to. And they're like, Grandma, you're an idiot. You should have just done it, right? Who cares what your neighbor says? That's what the kids will tell us. Anyway, but sometimes we
Oh,
like to twist our
no.
thinking into thinking that they are the ones that are keeping us from doing things, right? That they're the ones that are keeping us from living this free life. But it's us. It's us. And we're just using these scapegoats around us to hold ourselves back, right? Jody Moore talks a lot about how fast we make decisions. She says a lot of people tend to make decisions very quickly and others make decisions on a much slower process. But she said in general, you want to make a decision as quickly as is prudent. So obviously, if you're buying a house, it's going to be a little bit longer than if you're deciding what to eat for dinner. But her point being that sitting and stewing in the indecision is where nothing gets done and no progress is made. You cannot make progress until the decision is made. And then you've either made the right choice or like the most prudent choice and you get what you want, or you learn and you move on down the road and maybe you make a different choice to go down a different path. But the fact of the matter is, choosing rapidly will almost never be a bad choice.
So, so yeah, thinking about this. So if we're afraid of what others can think, that's a great thought, that they're not going to be explaining why they didn't start the business or execute on whatever the decision is. Um, they're not going to be answering for our choices. We are, and that's kind of like why we stay in that fear spot, is because we don't want to accept the responsibility that comes with the freedom and the agency. Like if we can blame it on somebody else, push it off on somebody else and blame them, that's easier, that's safer. Like we're not the ones going to be, like in our mind we're like, oh yeah, well, it's their fault, right? So it is scary to take the responsibility, the agency, the freedom, and make the decisions yourself, because you're also accepting the consequences or the follow through or anything else that comes, the responsibility that comes along with taking agency to make our decision. Okay. So if we don't give ourselves permission or set ourselves free, we're holding ourselves in bondage. And we're also kind of like, if it's a spouse that we're waiting for them to give us permission, we're kind of holding them in bondage too. Like that's kind of a burden to them. Like, oh, I need to make these decisions not only for myself, but for my spouse or for my best friend or for my, my child or whatever, because we're not giving ourselves agency. So we're not only holding ourselves in bondage, but we're putting other people in bondage too. That you can retain the power over making choices for me. Like, who wants to make the choices and accept the accountability for other people's lives? Like, it's enough of a struggle to be able to accept the agency and the decisions and the responsibilities for your own decisions that you make. So like, we get it. It's a big scary thing. It's pretty big, but it's also, kind of focus on that freedom and that power of making those decisions, that kind of both the I'm trying to use an analogy and it won't come to mind, but it's both the the gas pedal and the brake pedal, kind of both.
Well, along with that analogy, when you push the gas, you get two things. You get power and forward momentum, and you get freedom, right? And the forward momentum is exciting. The freedom is a little bit terrifying because you can now drive to California and go to the beach, or you can run into a brick wall. Like, there are so many options, and some are fantastic and some are like death, right? So, not that most of your decisions are going to end in death. Don't take that for, but what I'm saying is it all comes down to accountability, right? If we're going to be accountable for our futures, we have to start pushing the gas. Get your foot off the brake. Ease it off if you need to, but make some decisions and start moving forward with your life, right? And what you're saying, Audrey, leads us right into this aspect of agency in regards to our kids, because it's very easy to blame someone else for your choices, and when our kids start making mistakes, very often we start blaming ourselves. So this is a great part.
Yeah.
So the step one for
Yeah.
teaching our kids to own their own agency is to start very small, right? Your 4-year-old is not capable of deciding where the family vacations this year. I was reading a book that made me laugh, a celebrity's book, where he was nervous about his oldest child accepting the second sibling being born into the family. So they asked the psychologist what to do. And the psychologist was like, well, let your son name the baby. And all us experienced parents are like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. 'Cause
It's going to be named like
the kid was
Marble
6
or
and his first
something.
choice was Luigi. And I'm like, well, there you have it. So anyway, they learned their lesson, but we don't give these massive responsibilities to our small children. We give them small choices so that they learn to exercise agency and they learn to make good and then bad choices and learn from them, and before they get into big, massive, important choices.
Yes, yes, that is so true. So start when they're small, but also with small decisions. So a good example for this, I was helping my boys clean out their closet the other day, and I realized, well, a little while back, and I realized these boys don't throw away
Mm.
toys when they're broken. And so I was like going through these things in my mind, like, okay, timing, permission, freedom. Like, I need to give these boys a little pep talk that they have my permission to throw away a toy when it's broken. So if they're waiting for mom's permission, you've got it. You are allowed, you have my permission to throw away toys when they're broken. And also the freedom that comes with that. You have the freedom to decide to throw away this toy so it's not taking up space in your closet. And then you'll have space in your closet for something else, right? And so just kind of talking through a little bit of this idea of agency with themselves. But if you keep that broken toy in your closet, it's just like it's such a lack of agency that yeah, so I was working with them on that you have my permission to throw away broken toys. And that's just a start. It's just a little start on giving yourself permission and the freedom to one tiny baby step toward
Yeah,
agency.
and then you as a mom gets to work on relinquishing some control, right? I remember one of the first times that I allowed
Yeah.
my children to go through their toys. It was a time to purge some toys and take them to Goodwill or whatever. And they went through, and I remember having some issues with what they wanted to get rid of because they were either memorable toys or something I had spent a lot of
Yeah.
money on.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, no, 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 not
Yeah.
that one. Or like they wanted to get rid of like the like really high quality blocks and like keep the dumb Pokemon cards or something. And I'm thinking, no, you keep the, but in the end, I just had to say, well, these are their toys. They get to choose. And if they choose, they will have more ownership over them. They will be more likely to take care of them, more likely to make better decisions regarding their toys and other aspects of their life as well. But yeah, it's tricky when mom doesn't want to relinquish control. Ask me how I know. And this reminds me of one of the quintessential lessons of raising toddlers, and that is giving them two acceptable choices, right? And letting them choose. For example, time for bed, guys. You can walk up to bed on your own, or I can carry you up to bed. What do you want to do? Right? And most of the time, that's just a parenting tactic to get what you know they need to do that they don't want to do. But it allows them a little bit of agency instead of saying, it's time for bed, let's go right now. And they just think, mom's always bossing me around and always doing things that I don't want to do. You get to say, you can choose. You can choose to have a piggyback ride, or you can choose to crawl up like a crab, or you can choose to sleep backwards in your bed if you want. You can choose to use a pillow or not. You can choose to sleep in pajamas or not. There's so many different little consequential, is that the right word? Inconsequential choices. There
Inconsequential.
are so many little inconsequential choices that they get to work on every single day that will help strengthen that power of agency.
Yes, that is so true. Just to bring them out of the temper tantrum state and into a decision
Mhm.
making state. Like give them opportunities
Yeah,
often to
into a
make
state of
little
power,
decisions.
really, right? Because as
Yeah.
a 3-year-old, life's
Yeah.
got to be really powerless feeling, you know?
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's like my 3-year-old. He is in this stage where he's constantly saying, so you'll say, no, you can't read that book right now. And he'll say, fine, I'm not going to sleep with you tonight. Cause we sleep, co-sleeping. I'm like, please, can you please go sleep somewhere else? You kicked me really bad in this, but it's like he wants to retain
Yes, some
agency
power.
over something that he
Mhm.
thinks is, this little power
Mhm.
struggle thing. And so he's always constantly taking away things from me that he really can't take away. Like, fine, I'm not going to go to the bathroom ever again. Like, okay, buddy,
Dad's
you
gonna
see how
punish
that
me.
works.
Yeah.
Well,
Sweet things.
um, all right, step 2 of teaching your kids agency. So move on to a little bit larger responsibility. And letting go of control by mom. And then you have to respect their choice and allow them to make that consequence. And it has to be something bigger than you can choose to walk to your bed or I can carry you. Because they know, I mean, they grow a little bit and they know, well, I'm still doing what mom wants me to do. Like both choices are acceptable to her.
Right.
She's given me choices,
Right.
but they're both
They
things that
start to
she
figure you
wants.
out. Yeah.
I know.
Yes, I love that. You have to start allowing them to solve their own problems, even if it's painful to watch. One of the examples of this concept for me and my kids is relationship issues, right? So between siblings, between neighbors, this has been something that's been a struggle for me because I want to step in and say, "Oh, we're not being nice to each other." But when kids are allowed free play without adult supervision and they're allowed to work through these relationship issues, they gain so much. They learn so much. And obviously parents make sure that there's no like real bullying or violence going on, but when they're allowed to say, "Hey, I don't know that I want to play with that kid because he's kind of been a bully lately." Great. You're learning to stand up for yourself. You're learning to acknowledge when someone's behavior is inappropriate and it's not something you want to subject yourself to. Um, you give them a chance to have a little bit more ownership over their life. And then, like you said, to experience the consequences of their actions. And sometimes that's positive, like distancing themselves from someone who's not treating them correctly. Sometimes they're negative, like, well, you were playing with a toy a little bit too rough and you broke it. So the consequence is you have to find a way to buy a new one. What are you going to do? Right. And all of a sudden, ugh, I need to pay a little bit of better attention about how I treat things because I'm responsible for this or I'm responsible for my actions when they go awry.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so true. And it's hard for us to watch them make a decision that we know how it's going to come out.
Yes. Yes. It's hard enough when they're
Oh,
10. When they're 18,
oh.
you're just like, I need to go take a nap.
Yeah.
Tell me when it's over.
Yeah. I know. So an example of this, like like taking, the next step is something that we do is like I control the condition of the whole house. Like it is to my standards. Cleanliness. I'm talking about cleaning, except for their bedrooms. If we're not having company that needs to stay in their bedroom. So they get to control the condition of their own bedroom. Like that's their space, that's their little domain. They get to decide on the cleanliness level on, if they want to rearrange their room and put the bed over here instead of over here. Like give them their own little domain, their own little kingdom and see how they run it. Like give them a practice run before they're out on their own, setting up their own house. Um, of course we teach them, give them tons of tips and tools by making them be up to my cleanliness standard and the rest of the house. But and I do encourage them, wow, if I was trying to work on my math homework at the desk that you're sitting at in your bedroom, I just couldn't even focus because of all that clutter around me. Give tips or ideas, but yeah, I pretty much let my kids have their room be in their condition as long as I'm not having company over. And it gives them a practice shot. And some of them are completely okay with the mess, and some of them take the initiative and they want it in a certain
Yeah.
condition. And it's just giving them really the opportunity to explore that and decide that for
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, all my kids share rooms with at least one other sibling, but just by walking around and looking at their state of their beds, you can tell what each child's house will look like when they're an adult. This child's will be very decorated and clean and put together, and this child's will be a total disaster, and this child will never find anything but they have lots of time to learn. So I had one of my son's room was a little bit stinky. He has a litter box for his cat in there. So I said, "Hey, you might want to go take care of that litter box or clean your room. Something's going on in there you need to take care of." He shares with his 3-year-old brother. He came out with 3 dirty diapers that had fallen behind the dresser. I'm like, well, and there you
Ew.
go. Pays to clean the room. Okay. But yeah, something that is, like you said, their own domain. I love that. Okay, step 3 for teaching these kids agency is work. We have got to teach them how to work. And we've talked about this in a number of episodes. Um, Starts with working at home, starts with little tasks, starts with allowing the 5-year-old to load the dishwasher or the 6-year-old to sweep up after dinner or any number of tasks that need to be done around the house. A job for teenagers, right? I know this is kind of, there's some conflicting thoughts about this because teenagers are busy and a lot of parents don't want their kids to work. But when they learn those skills early on, then they will know what they're getting into when they go into the job market. It will be a boss that requires you to show up on time and requires you to do things that you hate doing and are not fun, because that is the job, right? I personally have had to learn over and over, and this is, I only have one almost adult, so I'm sure I will continue to learn for the next 20 years, um, to resist the temptation to keep them from making bad choices. Now, obviously, there are some choices we're going to protect them from. I am not going to allow my child, within my knowledge, to drive 25 miles over the speed limit. Does he sometimes speed? Oh, probably. But that is one of those natural consequences that he will learn sooner or later what happens when you speed, right? I'm not going to allow him to stay up all night long, um, out with friends in some dangerous part of town. I have certain limits, but if he's home, he might choose to stay up all night and then not be able to get up for work, and that would probably be a poor choice, right? So the point is to learn how to advise our children, especially as they get older, without coercing them, because they get to live with those consequences of their agency.
Yeah. I really like this. I stand by this because it's when a child is working, they're making constantly making little decisions as they work. Okay? So if you give them a little plot in the garden and that's theirs for the year, what do they plant in it? How well do they maintain the weeds? When do they harvest? What do they harvest? If they're, even if they're out there weeding, is this a weed? Is this a plant? How do I hold the rake? Do I rake right to left? Do I rake left to right? Just thousands of little decisions. And you get better at decision making the
Mm-hmm.
more decisions that you make. So it's just kind of the practice, and work provides so many opportunities for them to just, even from a tiny to a big, in a big way, to just make decisions. And I totally am on the side, like a proponent of teens working. I think it's really good for them. It gives them agency because they decide where to work. They make decisions all day long at work, or all the time that they're there at work. And also then they have a little spending money and they decide what to do with that money. Okay, so do I spend this money? Do I save
Mm-hmm.
this money? How do I spend this money? What do I invest this money in? If I'm saving, all those sort of decisions, and just having the opportunity to execute on decisions is something that work provides the opportunity for constantly.
Just a few final thoughts. I think that the act of making bad, quote unquote, choices ourselves and watching our children misuse their agency or make decisions that bring them some sort of pain is one of the hardest things in life. But this power of choice and power of execution is also one of our greatest treasures, right? Imagine if someone else made all your choices for you. You would feel like a 3-year-old for the rest of your life, right? So, like Superman knows, where great power is given, great responsibility is expected, right? We have so much responsibility over our choices because we have so much freedom. So allowing our children to make these mistakes is painful, but that will yield them the most benefit in the end. Like I was saying earlier, I actually got this line from Kristen Goodman Coaching on Instagram. She had this great video the other day where she said, she was talking specifically about perfectionism, which, if you think about, is actually the inability to make free choices. It's like you are very narrowly pigeonholing yourself into only making specific choices because you think that's perfect, right? She says, when you make a choice, you either get the result you want or you learn. So making the choice is the answer, whether it's the wrong one or the right one. And who's to say what the wrong one is? You either get what you were hoping for or you learn and you make different choices down the road. So it sounds kind of like a win-win to me.
Yeah, that is some great thoughts. So I want to share just a final thought about giving yourself agency, giving yourself permission. This is one of the most powerful things you'll do in your life, and it's really a good idea to do, not only for the empowerment that you will have for yourself, but for the example you will set for your children, and give them a head start on life through giving them opportunities to use agency themselves, but not giving up your agency to anyone else, whether that be just anybody else. Don't give up your agency. Retain it for yourself, and that will be one of the most powerful things you can do, both for yourself and for the children you're raising.
Thanks for listening, friends. Click the link in the show notes to subscribe to our email and never miss another episode.
Show us some love by leaving a review on iTunes or sharing the podcast with a friend. Thanks for all your support. We'll talk to you next week. Give me just a second. requesting more bandwidth from the rest of my family who may be home.
Oh, yeah.
Your
Okay.
your screen freezes. You freeze in motion about every 15 seconds.
Mhm. Sometimes you freeze, but I've found that when I can't hear you, if I just wait in a couple of seconds,
Yeah.
it'll all come in real fast. Has that ever happened to you? Like, oh, Audrey sped up. Okay, and
I
she's back.
didn't get a
Okay.
word you said, but I agree totally.
Yeah. That happens sometimes
Uh,
too.